Some of history's greatest achievements weren't born from harmony, but from intense competition. When brilliant minds clash, the friction often creates the spark that ignites innovation. Today, let's explore 5 legendary rivalries between men who changed the world, for better or worse, while trying to outdo each other. Hey, I'm Michael, and welcome to this episode of Hoodie History, where I'm exploring 5 intense rivalries that shaped our world. It's great to have you here. This is part 1 of a series I'll be publishing about historic rivalries, and we'll start with the boys. Rivalry is something deeply human, that feeling of competition that pushes us to excel, but the 5 rivalries we're covering today elevated that dynamic to extraordinary heights, fundamentally altering the course of history. From electricity that powers your home to the mathematical formulas used to build modern technology, these fierce competitions shaped our modern life in ways you might not even realize. So buckle up as we explore some of history's most consequential showdowns. Tesla versus Edison, the War of Currents. In the late 19th century, 2 brilliant but radically different inventors faced off in a battle to determine how electricity would power the modern world. Thomas Edison, America's most famous inventor, was a practical businessman and tireless self-promoter. With over 1,000 patents to his name, Edison had built an empire on his direct current, DC, electrical system. He was, by 1884, the established king of American innovation. Into this world stepped Nikola Tesla, a Serbian immigrant with an extraordinary mind. Unlike Edison's trial-and-error approach, Tesla could visualize complete machines in his head before building them. He briefly worked for Edison, improving his DC generators, but the relationship soured dramatically. As the story goes, Edison promised Tesla $50,000 if he could improve his DC generators. When Tesla delivered the improvements, after months of 18-hour workdays, Edison claimed it was just a joke, saying, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor." Instead of the promised sum, he offered a $10 weekly raise. Tesla promptly resigned and was soon digging ditches for $2 a day to survive. But this setback would fuel a rivalry that would transform how we power our world. While Edison was committed to his direct current system, Tesla developed alternating current, AC, which could transmit electricity over much longer distances with minimal power loss, crucial for electrifying a growing nation. When industrialist George Westinghouse recognized AC's potential and partnered with Tesla, Edison recognized the threat to his DC empire. What followed was one of history's first major corporate smear campaigns. Edison publicly electrocuted stray animals using Tesla's AC system to demonstrate its dangers. This grim spectacle culminated in the execution of Topsy the elephant at Coney Island in 1903, which Edison's company filmed and distributed. Edison even influenced the adoption of the first electric chair, which deliberately used AC current, hoping newspaper headlines about the killer current would turn public opinion against Tesla's system. The rivalry reached its climax at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Westinghouse and Tesla won the contract to light the exhibition using AC electricity, creating a spectacular display that dazzled millions of visitors and proved AC's safety and efficiency. The war of currents was essentially decided. Tesla's AC system ultimately prevailed and powers our homes to this day. But the rivalry's outcome had dramatically different consequences for the 2 men. Edison remained wealthy and famous, while Tesla, despite his world-changing contributions, died nearly penniless in 1943, largely forgotten until recent decades. Today we recognize that Tesla's vision fundamentally shaped our modern electrical world. Mozart versus Salieri, musical rivals in Vienna's court. In the opulent concert halls of 18th century Vienna, a rivalry played out between 2 composers that has captivated our imagination for centuries, even inspiring an Oscar-winning film. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was the definition of a prodigy. By age 5, he was composing music. By 6, he was performing for European royalty. His brilliant, seemingly effortless compositions reflected his personality, passionate, playful, and sometimes crude. Antonio Salieri took a different path to musical success, Through discipline and political savvy, this Italian composer rose to become the Austrian emperor's court composer, one of the most prestigious musical positions in Europe. His compositions were elegant, popular, and brought him considerable fame during his lifetime. When Mozart arrived in Vienna in 1781, he represented everything Salieri had worked to become, but with a natural talent that seemed to require no effort. While Salieri had meticulously climbed the ladders of court politics, Mozart produced masterpieces with apparent ease. The popular image of their rivalry, immortalized in Peter Schaffer's play and film Amadeus, paints Salieri as consumed by jealousy, plotting Mozart's downfall and possibly even his death. This dramatic version suggests Salieri recognized Mozart's superior genius, but couldn't accept being overshadowed by someone so childish and vulgar in behavior. But how much of this was true? Historical evidence suggests a more complex relationship. They were certainly competitors in a cutthroat musical environment, where commissions and royal favour meant everything. There were instances of professional sabotage. Salieri reportedly used his influence to block performances of Mozart's operas. Yet there were also accounts of the two composers attending each other's performances and even collaborating occasionally. Mozart's letters mention Salieri with respect rather than animosity. When Mozart's The Magic Flute premiered, Salieri reportedly took his young daughter to multiple performances, genuinely appreciating Mozart's work. After Mozart's death in 1791 at just 35 years old, rumours circulated that Salieri had poisoned him. Rumours that gained new life with Schaffer's dramatic interpretation. But most historians agree Mozart likely died of natural causes, possibly rheumatic fever. The intriguing aspect of this rivalry isn't just who won. History has clearly favoured Mozart's legacy, but how it reflects the eternal tension between natural genius and disciplined craft. Each man approached their art differently, and their competition pushed both to create works that have enriched our cultural heritage for centuries. Amundsen versus Scott, the race to the South Pole. In 1911, two explorers from opposite ends of Europe embarked on a deadly race to claim one of the last great geographical prizes, being first to reach the South Pole. Norwegian Roald Amundsen was a meticulous planner who had dedicated his life to polar exploration. British Royal Navy Captain Robert Falcon Scott was a complex figure, brave and determined, but committed to a vision of exploration that prioritized scientific discovery alongside adventure. Their rivalry began with deception. Amundsen had originally planned to conquer the North Pole, but when American explorers claimed to have reached it first, he secretly redirected his expedition south. He didn't even tell his own team their destination until they were already at sea. Then, in a calculated move that must have felt like a slap to Scott, Amundsen sent him a telegram. "Beg leave to inform you, Fram proceeding Antarctic, Amundsen." Scott, who had been planning his Antarctic expedition for years, suddenly found himself in an unexpected race. Both men established base camps on the Antarctic ice shelf in early 1911. Scott at McMurdo Sound and Amundsen at the Bay of Whales, about 60 miles closer to the pole. Their approaches to the challenge could not have been more different. Amundsen embraced lessons learned from the Inuit people, using dog sleds as his primary transportation and dressing in loose-fitting furs. Scott, representing British imperial tradition, relied partly on motorized sledges, which quickly failed, ponies, which couldn't handle the conditions, and ultimately man-hauling, having his men drag heavy sledges themselves. On October 19, 1911, Amundsen set out with 4 companions, 52 dogs, and a single focus, reaching the pole first. Scott departed on November 1 with a larger team, carrying scientific equipment and collecting specimens, adding weight but also research value to their journey. Amundsen's team reached the South Pole on December 14, 1911, planted the Norwegian flag, and left a letter for Scott. They returned safely to their base camp after a journey of 99 days and more than 1,800 miles. Scott's team arrived at the pole 34 days later, on January 17, 1912, only to find the Norwegian flag and Amundsen's letter. Scott wrote in his diary, "The worst has happened. All the daydreams must go. Great God, this is an awful place." The real tragedy came during Scott's return journey. Facing extreme cold, malnutrition, and frostbite, Scott and his 4 companions all perished. They were found frozen in their tent just 11 miles from a supply depot that might have saved them. When news of the expedition's outcomes reached the world, it created a study in contrasting national reactions. Norway celebrated Amundsen's triumph of efficiency and planning. Britain mourned Scott and celebrated his team's courage, scientific contributions, and heroic failure, with Scott's last journals becoming a bestseller. This rivalry reveals how different approaches to the same challenge, efficiency versus tradition, singular focus versus scientific exploration, can lead to dramatically different outcomes. While Amundsen lived until 1928, continuing his exploration career, Scott's legacy was defined by his fatal expedition, both its scientific achievements and its tragic end. Newton versus Leibniz, the battle for calculus. In the late 17th century, two of history's greatest mathematicians found themselves locked in a bitter dispute over who had invented one of mathematics' most powerful tools, calculus. The rivalry between Isaac Newton and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz would divide the scientific community for decades. Isaac Newton was the quintessential British genius, brilliant but reclusive, working in isolation at Cambridge University. By his account, he had developed the fundamentals of calculus, which he called the method of fluxions, around 1665 to 1666, though he published little about it for decades. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz was Newton's perfect foil, a German polymath who excelled not just in mathematics, but also philosophy, politics, and diplomacy. Leibniz developed his own version of calculus around 1675 to 1676, and published his methods in 1684, with a clearer notation system that we still use today. The controversy erupted in the early 1700s when supporters of Newton accused Leibniz of plagiarism. The accusation was that during Leibniz's visit to London in 1676, he had somehow gained access to Newton's unpublished work. Leibniz denied this, insisting he had developed his methods independently. What followed was perhaps history's most consequential academic feud. The Royal Society, with Newton serving as its president, formed a committee to investigate the dispute. Unsurprisingly, their report sided entirely with Newton. Later analysis revealed that Newton himself had written the report anonymously, essentially serving as judge in his own case. As the dispute intensified, it divided mathematicians along national lines. British mathematicians exclusively used Newton's methods and notation, while continental Europeans adopted Leibniz's system. This split severely hampered British mathematical progress for over a century, as Leibniz's notation proved more flexible and intuitive. Modern historians generally believe both men developed calculus independently. Newton likely created his version first, but kept it largely private, while Leibniz developed his later, but published first, and created the superior notation system. The tragedy of this rivalry is that these two brilliant minds, who might have collaborated to advance mathematics even further, instead spent their energy in bitter dispute. Leibniz attempted reconciliation several times, but Newton, known for his long-standing grudges, rebuffed these efforts. When Leibniz died in 1716, his funeral was largely unattended, a sad end for one of history's great thinkers. Newton outlived his rival by a decade, dying in 1727 with his reputation intact as Britain's greatest scientist. The calculus dispute teaches us that even science, which we tend to think of as objective, can be deeply influenced by human emotions, national pride, and the desire for recognition. Today, we acknowledge both men's contributions to a mathematical tool that makes modern engineering, physics, and much of our technological world possible. Hamilton versus Burr, the deadly political feud. Our final rivalry is perhaps history's most famous duel, a political feud that escalated until only blood could settle it. Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr were both brilliant, ambitious men whose parallel paths in early America repeatedly crossed, generating friction that ultimately proved fatal. Both were orphans who fought in the Revolutionary War. Both became prominent New York lawyers, and both harbored intense political ambitions. But their similarities seemed to fuel their antagonism rather than create common ground. The rivalry began in earnest in 1791 when Burr defeated Hamilton's father-in-law, Philip Schuyler, for a Senate seat. Hamilton took this loss personally, and a pattern emerged. Whenever Burr sought political advancement, Hamilton would work tirelessly behind the scenes to thwart him. Their animosity reached a critical point during the presidential election of 1800, when Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr tied in electoral votes. As the House of Representatives deliberated on breaking the tie, Hamilton used his considerable influence to sway Federalist representatives to support Jefferson, a man whose politics he opposed, rather than see Burr in power. Hamilton reportedly called Burr a dangerous man who ought not to be trusted with the reins of government. Burr became vice president but was effectively sidelined by Jefferson. When he ran for New York governor in 1804 to revive his political career, Hamilton again worked aggressively to defeat him. After this loss, Burr learned of a letter where Hamilton had expressed a more despicable opinion of him at a dinner party. This was the final straw. Following the code of honor of their day, Burr demanded Hamilton disavow any negative remarks he had ever made about him, an impossible request that Hamilton couldn't satisfy without sacrificing his reputation. The resulting duel was set for July 11, 1804 at Weehawken, New Jersey, ironically the same location where Hamilton's son had died in a duel 3 years earlier. At dawn, the men took their positions. What exactly happened next remains controversial. Some accounts suggest Hamilton deliberately fired into the air as a matter of honor. Others believe he fired first and missed. What's certain is that Burr's shot struck Hamilton in the abdomen, and he died the following day. Hamilton's last hours were spent with his family and putting his considerable financial affairs in order. His death at 49 deprived America of one of its most brilliant financial and political minds, and permanently weakened the Federalist Party he had helped found. For Burr, the duel proved Pyrrhic. Though murder charges were eventually dropped, he became a pariah. He would never again hold public office, and is remembered more for killing Hamilton than for his own considerable achievements. This rivalry reminds us that politics has always been personal and passionate. Hamilton and Burr's fatal encounter stands as a stark example of what happens when political animosity escapes the boundaries of debate and enters the realm of personal honor. The 5 rivalries we've explored today were more than personal conflicts. They were collisions of different worldviews, approaches, and visions that shaped our modern world. Tesla and Edison gave us the electrical infrastructure that powers our daily lives. Mozart and Salieri's competition produced musical masterpieces we still enjoy centuries later. Amundsen and Scott's race to the pole showed contrasting approaches to exploration and discovery. Newton and Leibniz's dispute gave us calculus, the mathematical language of science and engineering. And Hamilton and Burr's deadly feud reminds us of the personal stakes behind political ideals. In each case, the rivalry pushed both parties to greater heights than they might have reached alone. As the writer Somerset Maugham once said, "It's a funny thing about life. If you refuse to accept anything but the best, you very often get it." These rivals refused to accept anything less than victory, and in their struggle, we all won through their innovations, art, and discoveries. Which of these rivalries fascinated you the most? Do you think great achievements require the push of competition, or can collaboration produce equally important breakthroughs? Thanks for joining me for this exploration of some of history's most consequential face-offs. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories from history. I'm Michael, and I look forward to sharing more fascinating stories and rivalries with you here at Hoodie History.